Great. So I'm very excited about our panelists this afternoon, and the topic of discussion is the patient perspective on clinical trials. We heard a lot about some of the really exciting clinical trials that are coming down the road, but I think we've been very honored to have a group of people who've had a lot of experience participating in clinical trials, and I think they all offer a very unique and important perspective. So I'm going to moderate the session. And the way we'll do this is that, they'll introduce themselves, give a little bit of their own perspective, and then this is really supposed to be a highly interactive session. So if you have questions from the audience, please provide them. So, and with that, I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Pope. I have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2I. And I was fortunate enough to participate in Dr. Wagner's myostatin inhibitor trial that she spoke of earlier. It was a very exciting time, and I want to kind of impart that all to you here, the importance of participating in clinical trials. There's never, ever a good time to have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, but at least it's a very exciting time today. And I think that we all need to really consider participating in trials and understanding the importance of them. Thank you.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Alexandra Leijenhorst. Sorry for my Dutch accent. I'm not a patient. I'm the mother of Kaya. He's sitting over there. And I'm reading from paper because I'm not a good speaker, but I want to share my story. I know that MD is different for everyone, but I would like to tell you a little about my son Kaya, who took part in the gene therapy LGMD2D of Professor Mendel. Kaya had always been hypotonic since birth, so when a friend noticed that he was crawling unusual, he had his CK levels checked. Around his 3rd birthday, we were told that he had Duchenne. We had already lost his eldest sister to a heart condition, and I was 8 months pregnant, so perfect timing from the universe. No, we were devastated. Nearly a year later, his diagnosis was confirmed as LGMD2D. In the Netherlands, only about 11 kids were diagnosed, and rare diseases are neglected, so we were raising all families together and looking abroad. I spent every night searching at the internet for a cure for my son, willing to go anywhere in the world. And then the United States is real close to the Netherlands. Our friends set up a foundation to raise money for our external health costs through charity events, and this enabled us to travel yearly to the States. And we met Professor Mendel about 10 years ago. His team was incredibly kid-centered, and we came back for several years, hoping Kaya could join a trial someday, but knowing in between he was also in the best hands. And let's make that clear, Kaya and Dr. Mendel are my heroes. While we were waiting for a cure, we built a fully adapted house. At home and at school, we focused on possibilities, not on limitations. And we put him on orthomolecular regimen and prednisone to slow the progression. And we gave him the tools to accept to become through weekly therapies. We wanted to stop the progressive muscle breakdown process, not only for my son, but for everyone with the disease. So we were delighted that Kaya could take part in the gene therapy trial in 2015. He was 13. For the first 3 months of the trial, we stayed in Columbus, followed by 10 visits in 2 years. We had to prepare, thinking about flights, housing, and lost income. Through fundraising, we were able to pay all our travel costs, and the Ronald McDonald House could provide us accommodation, but not for the whole family, as we are a family of 5, so sometimes Kaya and I traveled on our own, and that was, for every member of the family, sometimes a little bit difficult. Taking part in the trial is the best we could have done at that moment, but it was also a little bit scary. Our life was in balance, and we didn't fight the wheelchair. We had a certain kind of perspective, and signing up to the trial had given us hope, but at the other hand, nothing was certain. My questions couldn't all be answered as this had never done before, and the night before the trial, I can tell you, I didn't sleep. The doctors had told us in detail what they were going to do before. We signed the consent, Kaya signed the consent, and in the OR, Kaya's blood circulation in his upper and lower body was split, and he was infused in each leg with the virus and alpha-sarcoglycan that he missed. The procedure took hours, but I will never forget this. By the end, the 3 doctors seemed to be the 3 proud musketeers that came to me and told me that everything had gone well. Kaya could immediately feel a difference. He felt muscles that he had never felt before. His prednisolone dose was increased for a month, and we followed the schedules of the checkups. Kaya made the best of his time in Columbus. He joined the fencing club, as he likes to fence, picked up an American accent, which his English teacher in the Netherlands didn't like, and we made friends with families in the Ronald McDonald House in Columbus. Kaya impressively kept up with his schoolwork, but it was harder to keep up with his friends. We underestimate that. While Kaya was going through something of great magnitude in Columbus, his pals were being typical 13 years old, choosing pizzas and deciding to go which movies they want to see. The emotional gap between Kaya and his friends had widened, and by the time we got home, many friendships had vanished. And as a mom, I had a similar experience at the schoolyard. People thought we had been on a nice vacation in the States, and I was lucky to have contact with our other trials families because we had such a magnitude experience. We have our own Facebook group, and we remained close for 4 years after gene therapy. Gene therapy has improved Kaya's life, and I know a lot of you have seen him already. We have still hope for the future, and hope for all trial participants get full body, full dose treatments. That is a concern now. Hope that the FDA and investors notice the difference in patients' daily lives and not just the test results. Kaya had just finished a paper on gene therapy, and he is now determined to study at university. And Eric, who is here, we just made up a plan that the first thing you have to do is to clone Dr. Mendel. And above all, we hope that taking part of the trial was only the first step in beating this muscular dystrophy for good for all. Thank you.
Tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of the first gene therapy in the world for any form of muscular dystrophy. Based on the research by Dr. Kevin Campbell from the University of Iowa, I was treated by the team of Dr. Mendel, Dr. Hensel Stedman, and nurse Cheryl Wall at the Ohio State University Hospital. Daniel Brock was another patient in the trial. The goal of the trial was to check for safety and for gene expression. I knew the trial wouldn't be a benefit to me, as I was told it would not be therapeutic. The trial was safe, and it showed gene expression. Dr. Mendel and the people at MDA said because of what Daniel and I did, they were able to learn very valuable information the research could build upon. Unfortunately, shortly after the gene therapy, progress was stopped for about 5 years due to the death in the separate gene therapy trial. But 4 years ago, a trial using vascular delivery for 2D was created. My sister, June Burney, was the first participant. She saw some improvement, but has regressed back to baseline. Redosing is not possible without doing plasmapheresis, which has not been approved. Redosing is an issue that really needs to be addressed. I have 7 siblings. 5 of us have limb-girdle 2D. We were diagnosed over 40 years ago. I have 2 nieces that it skipped my sister, who does not have dystrophy. They have 2I. I'm a true believer in the gene therapy for the limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. It's great to see other related diseases, what they can use, what have been learned from the 2D. But I do worry that 2D will get left behind and not get much benefit. There have been new players in the limb-girdle muscular dystrophy research in the last few years. And I know that some of the researchers and companies were told that it's basically a milder disease, since we generally live longer than some of the other dystrophies. While average lifespan is longer in limb-girdle than some of the other dystrophies, patients and their families here today can tell you about the quality of life, how it deteriorates. Limb-girdle participants have taken risks for research, and we hope that limb-girdle does not get pushed aside. We need researchers and companies to remember what the trial participants have given to help gene therapy to get where it is today. Please don't abandon us. I'd like to share a quote from Dr. Mendel. I owe you a lot for where we are in this field. You were the very first person with MD to ever receive gene therapy, and we learned a lot from June as well. Thank you. And this is a picture of my family. The sister that's standing behind me is my sister June. This picture's 12 years old, but she's now in a wheelchair. She was the one that did the first vascular delivery. My sisters on the lower right, or on the lower part, they're in the wheelchairs. On the opposite of me, they're the ones that passed away. So, thank you.
Oh, okay. All right, so this is supposed to be a very interactive session, so please, start to think about questions that you have for our panelists, about participating in clinical trials, and questions that you should be thinking about. But maybe, I'll start by one question would be, I know people talked about it, in your introductions, but really, what is the importance of participating in a clinical trial?
Well, I kind of talked about it earlier, that, when you're told that you have a disease that has no cure or treatment and that it's progressive and that you'll eventually end up in a wheelchair, it really takes the wind out of your sails, as we all know. And but right now we're on the precipice of a very, very exciting time. All these treatments that we've been hearing about, coming through the lab and reading articles about and getting really excited about, are coming into the clinic right now. It's all coming to fruition. And it's very important for us as the patient community to work with those clinicians, get into those trials. And the trial I was in, it didn't work out the way we wanted, but we learned something. And I remember going into that trial thinking, do I want to do this? Or, I got to travel to Baltimore, 29 times. I mean, there's, a big commitment here. But it's very important that you participate in that, because we as patients have got to help those clinicians get these trials through, learn whether or not it works, or if it does, we continue with it. If it doesn't work, let's go on to the next thing. But the important thing is that the doctors and the researchers, these great, bright and brilliant minds that are here today, that we're lucky enough to hear from, is that they learn so that they can make the wise decisions to guide us to a cure.
I would just add to that, if we don't do the trials, we're not going to get anywhere. It's plain and simple as that. If you don't want a cure, don't get involved. But I think everybody in this room would be willing to do about anything to cure the disease. And I would just ask that everybody get involved. And you might have failures, but I think the successes will outweigh the failures.
All right, questions from the room. Well, people are still thinking about their questions. All right, so this is I think Donovan and actually you spoke to this too. For somebody who's new to participating in clinical trials, but has been going to see their physician in an MDA clinic, what are the main differences that somebody would expect when they were participating in that clinical trial?
Well, it's structured differently. The thing that I learned from going through the trial is you see how structured it is. It might seem like there's no method to the madness, but there really is. And when you go into an MDA clinic, you meet with them, they go over, you talk to you for 20 minutes, maybe, give you some new news. But, and then you come back in a year. But being in a clinical trial, you're there, it's an ongoing thing, you're learning stuff every month, every time that you're there.
Yeah, I think being in a trial is really tributed to a cure. Going to the MD clinics, it's just, you look forward for it half a year. We go twice a year. You see the doctor, you walk in and out, and most of the time you're not changed. And the trial really changed my son.
I guess I would add to that is most MDA clinics, they're not that specialized as far as what the research is. And when you go, the first time I went to the Ohio State University to meet Dr. Mendel and the team, it was amazing. The physical therapist there, and I went through the screening yesterday and I told them I'd tell them Dr. Mendel, but they need a raise, but I think he left. But it's really night and day because the average MDA doctor that is not specialized in research, but they do an important part because they gather data, and data, as we've learned over the last couple days, is a huge part of what they need.
Great. I think, all right, we have a question back there.
Is it possible for a patient to participate in more than one trial?
So the question for the rest of the room is it possible for patients to participate in more than one clinical trial?
I would answer that and I would say no. And the reason I say no at this time is when they did the gene delivery in 1999, when I did it, I actually did a blood test to be in the vascular delivery because I have been in contact with Dr. Mendel and told him I'd volunteer. But we did a blood test and I did still have a titer to the vector. So that's why, so I would say the answer to that is no. And then Dr. Mendel said, do you know anybody else that would do it? And then one of my sisters did it.
Great. There's another question in the back there.
Yeah, actually, I do have a question for Alexandra, but I just want to follow up on that question about doing more than one clinical trial. I absolutely agree with the response with respect to these gene therapies, but I think as far as potentially other therapies, they're not necessarily going to be an exclusion one to the other. I mean, I've been in 3, so gentamicin, Myo-29, which was one of the earlier, myostatin inhibitor, and then methylprednisolone IV. So you need to know the criteria of each study and what might exclude you from others. But with the virus, yes, that's right. The question I had, Alexandra, is, so I was just thrilled. I had goosebumps when you showed me the video of Kaya, and even just seeing him. Kaya, thank you for being here so much. And because my understanding is with the limited limb infusion, there wasn't really any guarantee, and it wasn't even presented as a therapeutic approach so much as it was more of a proof of principle than just the injection in the foot muscle. And I'm just kind of wondering from the patient side how that was presented to you, whether it was sort of clear to you that it might not help Kaya, and sort of what the thoughts were both for you and your son in weighing the kind of risk reward based on how it was presented to you.
Yes, before you go to trial, you have the consent to sign, and they go through every step, and they make really sure that they don't promise anything. So we knew that we probably didn't have any benefit, but we had the hope that Kaya could stay the same. as he was 13, and we have a couple of kids in the Netherlands that we have seen really quick going backwards in puberty. So yeah, we didn't feel we had a, it was just, we are running out of time with a kid of 13, you know. The trials that are going on are for children's, and he was 13. So if you skip that possibility, when will there be another possibility? So I think then it was the best time. Yeah.
Let me
I
add,
hadn't realized the age limit on that one. Okay.
Yeah.
thank
let
you.
me add something. You made a comment about injecting into the foot muscle. That's what they did with me. What they did with Kaya, and when they moved to the vascular delivery, they did a limb infusion with that. So it was different. They did the EDB muscle in my foot when they did mine, which I knew it wasn't going to change. But I did tell Dr. Mendel when he called me with the test results, I did tell him which foot it was in.
And I just want to thank you because the people willing to do that are heroic to me. So thank you.
It does speak to another kind of general question. Maybe you guys can provide some perspective of. So when you're sitting there and you're thinking about whether or not you want to participate in that particular clinical trial, what are the types of things that you'd recommend the people in the room think about? What are the questions they should ask, that kind of thing?
Well, in addition to the concerns about the treatment, consider things like travel. Where are you going to be traveling to? I went from Denver to Baltimore, which is a long haul. Some of these other clinical trials, we might be, these GRASP locations, there's more of those around. There's actually one in Denver. So, it would be much more convenient for me, obviously. I wouldn't have to get on an airplane. So, travel is a big concern. Obviously read the informed consent, ask all the questions that you have with the principal investigator. Those would be the things that come to my mind immediately.
Yeah. I think you don't know all the questions that you get when you're getting in the trial. I was worried about the costs, and after all, it was very easy. We raised in dinners and walks, and everybody supported us. What I didn't know by then was the antibodies. So going into trial, learning, there are always subjects that you don't know, but you will get help from the people that know. Yeah.
When I did it, the MDA was involved in my trial. MDA paid for pretty much everything because that was a long time ago. And the MDA, the only reason why we're here today, in my opinion, because what MDA did. If it wouldn't be for MDA, we wouldn't be here because of what they've done. So I think the other thing is you need to look when trials. I truly believe that companies if you're doing research, the company should start paying. They should be paid for. You should be paid for your travel. They should take care of your travel because it is a big expense for the people that were involved in some of the trials.
So that leads, so it's this come up a couple times. So, we talked a lot about travel. What tips do you guys have for how did you manage the travel and arrangements?
Well, I traveled alone, so the thing I learned was to pack light. Pack light, pack the bare minimum. However, always include an extra pair of socks and underwear.
Okay. Well, I found out that the flights are the cheapest on Tuesday evening late. That's the same flight when you book on Tuesday morning, but after 8, after 10, it is cheaper. So, and the way, if you book more in advance, it's also cheaper. So schedule the flights when you get your schedule of checkups.
I'd agree with them.
All right. And there's a question right there.
Is it on? I walked in just a little bit late, so if this was addressed, I'm sorry. But so I just got my specific diagnosis about 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. And from what I'm learning is you have to have a specific diagnosis for these clinical trials. And then how do you learn about it? I mean, I would have wanted to be in a clinical trial. I mean, I want to be in one right now. Besides going online and the clinicaltrial.gov, is it your doctors that got you? How did you learn about to get in the trial, I guess?
How I learned about it was when Dr. Campbell discovered the 2D gene. I went to University of Iowa, had a muscle biopsy, and then after that, he told me that, well, after he called me and told me the gene defect was identified, and actually back then they had to go to France because it was 20 years ago, but the thing that you need to do, well, I called him every month until they told me about Dr. Mendel's trial. They thought that was going to be the gene they were going to work on, and then they decided to. And I got Dr. Mendel's phone number, and I called him. And actually, when I called him, I didn't think he believed that actually I was telling him what I had, because I think it caught him by surprise. And then he said, I got to check with Dr. Campbell, and 30 minutes later I had a phone call that said, when can you get here? So you got to really research if you know the gene defect you have, you can try to find who the specialist is and go it that way. And I made a lot of phone calls, and sometimes that gets you in trouble with people too, but I guess Dr. Mendel still likes me.
Other thoughts about how to find trials? Dan, how did you find?
Well, I also participate in a natural history study with Dr. Matthews in Iowa. And I think that, again, it's a very big, important part of what we're doing as patients to participate in these natural history studies, which is where I heard about the trial. But it also sets the baseline so that they have data to compare, the natural course of limb-girdle 2I versus after treatment. So, I'd encourage you all to, if you have any kind of natural history studies going on for your particular subtype, look in there and participate. Again, another good way, real quick and easy, just go online, clinicaltrials.gov, and search for your condition.
How did you find the trial?
As I said, we saw Dr. Mendel since Kaya was 6, but the Netherlands was not very supportive going to a clinical trial in the States. At the other hand, in the Netherlands, we don't have anything, so it was up to us. But you are very lucky. Here in the States, there's a lot going on. And in the Netherlands, we are just 10 years behind.
Looks like there's a question in the back. Is that right?
Yeah, so I first wanted to say I spoke to Kaya earlier, and he explains the whole gene therapy thing to me better than any doctor could have. So he's got a bright future ahead of him. And my question to you, Alexandra, is is his trial still going on right now? Like, what's next? The fact that you noticed it when he was crawling, and that's how he's getting around today, is it's amazing to me. Like, because I started showing symptoms at 13, and I didn't walk like that when I was 17. So it's just amazing to me that that's how it's gone so far. And I just want to know what's next for him, and if he's still being dosed, if it's still going on.
Our trial from 2015 to 2017 is done. So, but maybe there is a next phase soon to have the IV dose. But for Kaya, he is having antibodies at this moment. So, but you have seen him; he can do everything he likes. So we have time for him. My worries is about the people who have also participated and are not doing so well at the moment. They need to be redosed, and we don't know when redosing is going to start. But I am a true believer that we will get around the antibodies anyhow.
It does bring up a bit of a larger question. So what tips do you have? People must ask you about participating in the trial. How about in social media? Are there do's and don'ts about how to communicate about your experience that you've been given?
Well, it was interesting. I participate in a Facebook group for 2I, and obviously people were very interested in it. And to be honest with you, it was very personal. I was a little hesitant to say, yeah, it's working, or no, it's not. Remarkably, it kind of struck me as, it surprised me that I felt that it was a little personal. And it wasn't until the trial was, getting near its end that I felt a little more comfortable about, I didn't want to give somebody false hope, but I also didn't want to be Debbie Downer, so I just kind of kept it quiet.
Yeah, you have to be careful what you share, and you never know in a big face group what people do with your posts. So, yeah, we stayed confidential, and never speak about the other patients, only about my own son.
Well, in 1999, there was no Facebook, so we didn't have that problem. But when my sister June was in the trial, and I hope people didn't get mad at me, we created our own Facebook trial group that was just for the patients, because then it wasn't to hide any data or anything. It was to kind of share what each other's going through. Because there will be highs and lows when you go through trials. And that's something people probably don't understand. Because you have the hope it's going to work, but then you have bad days, then you're like, oh man, it's not working. But overall, just like Alexander said, be very careful if you get in trials with social media. And if you have a group that's in your trial, create some way you guys can communicate together.
I'd like to add to that. One of the nice benefits of being in the trial I was in is that they would bring a few of us in together, so that as I was getting my infusion, I'd be sitting next to another patient. And you get 2 hours of talking personally with each other, and you can share some of the things that we're talking about. And it was very nice. It was very kind of comforting and supporting to me to know that they're kind of experiencing the same things I was.
Okay, it looks like a question over here.
I don't know if the 3 or even the 4 of you can answer this, but I'm hearing with the FDA is pushing for 50% receiving the treatment and then the control group receiving the placebo. How is that communicated? How is that leaving those that are actually receiving the placebo after the fact? How are they informed? And where do they go from there? And just one other last thing, Donovan, you're my hero. I just want you to know that. Thank you.
So the question is really about whether or not you had a placebo in your trial and if that was communicated to you.
Well, mine was an open label study, so there was no placebo. Everybody in the trial was getting it. Some of the other, it all depends upon how the trial is put together. There are some trials now where there will be a control group with a placebo, but then after that, everybody gets the medication. So it's nobody's left off, with just a placebo.
Any other thoughts about
Yeah,
that?
we didn't have a placebo, and I think from my point of view, how ethic is it that you have a placebo? Because in this disease, the progressive muscle breakdown can be so massive in a year that even if you promise to give the delivery after a year, it's not an equal chance. So I hope that placebo won't be in our trials.
When I did the trial, what they did is they did a placebo in one foot and the gene in the other foot. And I did not know which one at the time, and it was a double-blinded study, so Dr. Mendel didn't even know at the time.
Yeah, I'll just say every trial is different, and so if there was a placebo, obviously that'd be communicated as part of the consent process, so it's worth talking about within that individual trial. Other questions? Yep.
When you start the trial, is it just like a one-shot, like big dose of something, like one time? Or is it several shots and then follow-up? Just how do you get the treatment or the dose?
Well, again, I think that depends upon the treatment involved. With gene therapy, because we develop antibodies, that's pretty much a one-time shot. For example, the treatment that I was on, the domogrozumab, I think I had over 32 infusions.
Yeah, so Kaya got splitted blood flow, so his dose was once, but in a different in the next phase it won't be a splitted blood flow. I think they will do it by IV. Mm-hmm. So we are learning all the time from how we can treat people.
Yeah, it's just for the gene therapy in the trial, it's a one-time deal. And so because of the antibodies.
You might hear the term, I just want to add to that, you might hear the term washout period. For certain treatments, certain drugs, steroids and other things, there might be a 3 or a 4 month washout period where you're no longer on the drug and it clears out of your system and may allow you to be in other trials.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're getting close to our time, so maybe I'll just ask the group to reflect. So, 2 questions. What, in your experience, what was the hardest part about the trial? What was the best part? So.
Well, the hardest part was traveling. The other very difficult part were the MRIs. I took part in the initial feasibility study where they were still kind of working out the protocols from the MRIs, which resulted in me being stuffed into a little tube about this big for 2.5 hours. And they put all these coils and magnifiers on you. You feel like a mummy. They slide you into this tube, and at one time they had me elevated in the thing so high, my nose scraped across the front of the top of the tube. So the MRIs were very difficult for me, but throughout the trial, by the time I got towards the end, I had kind of conquered my enemy, and they weren't as bad. The best part, I think, was seeing the city of Baltimore and traveling.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, the best part of being in the trial was that you feel that you were doing something very special, working with the physicians, with the physiotherapy, with Dr. Mendel. We were the gene family. The hardest part was when the trial was closed and done, we had to go back to the Netherlands. And instead of having our checkups in a schedule, we fall back to half a year or once a year. And that is, I think, the hardest part.
I really don't know how to answer the question. Probably the travel, but you look back, that was pretty easy. So the hardest part is now waiting for the next treatment. And the best part was seeing Kaya.
I'd like to add just one thing that Alexandra said, that throughout the entire trial, I really had a sense that I was doing something important. And that certainly gave me a good feeling. Again, when you're looking at a condition like limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, doing something important is very empowering. And again, I encourage you all to do that.
That's great. Great. Well, I think I'd like to give our panelists another big round of applause.